so much of what surrounds conversations about race in sports, is indelibly connected to their labor and labor rights. And, that's what we're seeing with the NCAA, on a, I think, even much more exploitative level, because at least the players in these leagues are getting paid, and they can, in good faith, negotiate with the league that employs them. The NCAA, we've talked about this, Dave, before, but they, in my view, engage in incredibly exploitative practices as they rake in hundreds of millions of dollars, and their coaches get paid millions of dollars, for football, basketball. March Madness just happened. That rakes in millions upon millions for TV networks and for the universities. Players get $0. And now the Supreme Court is taking up this case as a labor issue. The NCAA is trying to argue that this is an amateur sport, and so it should be treated as such. But the fact that the coaches get paid millions of dollars kind of flies in the face of the amateurishness, right? It should be just the mechanic coming off the road and then in his spare time coaching the football team. But I digress. What is your sense of how this fight with the Supreme Court is playing out?
Oh, I mean, I followed it very closely, and what was so striking was that even the right-wing rump of the court, we're talking Thomas, Kavanaugh, Alito, they looked at what the NCAA was arguing, and they recoiled, which is not an uncommon thing that I've seen. Like, people who are on the right who just don't know how the business operates and don't realize how, frankly, how it's this unconstitutional labor space that's been carved out just for these so-called quote unquote student athletes, that they look at it and they're in shock that such a situation exists where coaches make millions of dollars, players make bupkis. And I think they received quite a shock to see no defenders on the Supreme Court, and particularly this right-wing edge of the Supreme Court saying, yeah, this doesn't seem like a fair labor practice at all. And asking questions that you and I have been talking about for a long time, and that long-time watchers have been saying for decades and decades. Like, they're acting like this is the first time they've ever thought of it, where they say things like, well, what happens? Where's the education come in? Like, why? Like, this is the questions the Supreme Court justices were asking. Like, why can't they take the classes that they want to take? Are they really getting an education for what they do on the sporting field? And so I think if I'm the NCAA, I'm feeling more pressured than ever, and more thinking more and more that their time operating in this certain business practice is over. And they've been corrupted by the sheer billions that have come into the sport. A statistic I always throw at people that I think is great for bar conversations is, Dabo Swinney, coach at Clemson, makes $10 million a year with bonuses coaching at Clemson. Danny Ford wins the national championship for Clemson in football in 1981. He made 50 grand. So how does a job that pays 50 grand in 1981 pay $10 million in 2021? That's about a change in the very basis of the sport. The very economic base has been utterly flushed with money, and it's raised questions for the athletes themselves when they see assistant coaches making millions of dollars a year.
And they could blow out their knee, and they could never see professional success and never make any money, and their jersey number could still be sold, and they're not making money off of that either. I mean, without their name on the back, I guess, by the university. But still, I mean, Sam, I'll let you go. But I want to get into how indelibly the old Southern racism component plays into this. But Sam, you can go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious as to what the answer is. I mean, obviously one answer is they need to be paid commensurate with, there needs to be, they need to be paid, because what they're doing is not, fundamentally is not amateur sports. But the other, solution, it seems to me, is to go back to that era where the head coach gets $50,000, right? Like, I don't know if it's possible to turn the clock back like that, but, and maybe, it's just, it seems the whole thing seems like even paying them, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be paid, but like the idea of colleges having this sort of like cottage industry, which is really not really a cottage industry in some of these places, right? It's almost like the college is built around, we have people go to classes so that we can actually justify having the football team,
Yeah,
and generate this
exactly.
revenue. Like maybe there should be like, I mean, or is it that you make it so onerous to pay the athletes that there needs to be some type of like relationship between the profits generated and what is paid to the student athletes, so that there's a rebalancing of what the whole enterprise is about.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things in what you said. Like, I don't know if we can turn back on what the coaches are getting paid, precisely because so many these contracts are signed for the next 10, 20 years, and they amount to billions and billions of dollars. So all we can really play with realistically is how that money gets allocated. And a lot of these coaches are under contract. So thinking about how to make sure the players are able to get a piece of the pie of something like an $8.8 billion NCAA contract, for example, I think is the only tangible way forward. Because if I had a magic wand, what I would do is just de-link our system of higher education from minor league sports altogether. Get the NBA to pay for its own minor league, which they're starting to take steps towards doing. Get the NFL to pay for its own training system to get this generation of players who are good enough to play, who want to play, sign them up. That's what other sports do. And it's no coincidence to me, and this goes to what Emma was inferring a couple minutes ago. It's no coincidence to me that the sports that depend on the universities to provide this kind of free labor and free training, these are the sports that center Black American athletes, football and basketball, because they're the most disempowered coming up through the youth sports system, so they're most easy to exploit. And that they're done through our university system is kind of disgusting. And that sports have become like a neoliberal tentpole of the entire economics of not just the universities, but these small university towns, right. South Bend, Indiana, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I mean, South Bend, where Notre Dame is, a century ago, Notre Dame's a small private college that has a cool football team, and it's a textile community. That's 100 years ago. 100 years in the future, it's not just a college town, it's a Notre Dame football town. And if the team does well, then the town does well. And if the team doesn't do well, then all the industries, like from hotel, service industries, they suffer. That is not a good way to operate. And that also answers the question, though, about why football players at the start of this horrific pandemic were deemed essential workers. Because they were while students are staying home doing the work, the players are putting themselves at terrible risk of what at the time was a pandemic we knew very, very little about. And they were being put to work. That's a problem.
Yeah. And I think, part of this too is that the NFL and the NBA are complicit in this exploitation. And the dirty secret is that the NBA and the NFL unions are complicit in a little of this exploitation in many ways, because they uphold these contracts between the league and the universities and the NCAA that says, if you want to come to the NFL, you've got to play 3 years of college football. You're not going to get paid. Mm-hmm. You could ruin your knee. You could blow out. You could make millions for the university. You could be a star player. And the families that have been betting on you, say a lot of these kids come from poor backgrounds, and they're banking on making millions of dollars in the league for a short period of time in order to help out their families. You'll never see that. And what's your take on that? I could rant about that forever, but like, because of that contract between the NCAA and the major leagues, this is why the system of exploitation and racism is still in place.
But the hidden joy in all of that, like a lot of dirty secrets, but there's a hidden joy in there, and that's that these players are really disempowered, but they also have a tremendous amount of power at the same time. They're disempowered because they don't have a union, they have no way to collectively bargain their health, they have no way to even collectively complain about their situation without risking losing their scholarship. But they also have so much power in that if they chose to withdraw their labor, say before the Final Four, they would be able to rewrite their relationship with power and with money with a snap of the fingers. And we've seen inklings of this in recent years. And there were even rumors going into this year's Final Four that players were going to refuse to come out and play unless certain changes were made in the structure. It didn't happen, unfortunately. But I've never heard the rumors so live as I did this year, as players are doing hashtag not NC no NCAA property and putting out using social media to shine the truth on what was going on. Because, injustice thrives in shadows. And the best thing about social media, and there's so much awful about it, but the best thing about it is that you can shine light on whatever you want to shine light upon. And a lot of players have been taking advantage of that in recent years, oftentimes defying the social media rules that are set down by coaches, which can be ridiculously dictatorial.
I for one would love to see that development where there's minor leagues for football and for I don't know how what the future of football should really be, frankly, but
Yeah.
these minor leagues for basketball, so that this onus, so that you're able to sort of like de-emphasize these sports programs in the context of these colleges. It just doesn't seem.
It's become a religion though for towns, Sam. It's just not a realistic way to go
I know that. It's so disturbing, the idea that um that the fortunes of these towns are so intertwined with a multi-million dollar football program. Is just sort of disturbing, I think, on some level. But
but then you get these incredibly bizarre scenes, like last summer after the killing of George Floyd. You see a march in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, of the football players. You see a march at the University of Mississippi of the football players, where they're joined by their white coaches to march in the town against racism and police brutality. Now, have these coaches all of a sudden become born again social justice activists? Not at all. But they understand that their players have so much power in these communities. And the fact that they're small towns actually gives the players more leverage than if, say, the big college programs were in like Philadelphia, New York City. It gives them a degree of leverage that I think over the next few years, we're going to see them leverage even more.